Welcome to Wildfire. I'm Denby, and this is Midlife Medicine for Women on the Rise. Here we believe your body isn't burning out, it's burning through. I speak with healers, teachers and medicine women who walk this path alongside us. And once a month in our Wisdom in the Rune segment, I sit with real, ordinary women whose stories are the medicine. No pedestals, no credentials required, just truth. So, let's light it up. My guest today is Renée Gould, a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, energetic healer, Bowen Therapist, Hypnotist, meditation teacher, and Reiki Master. And she's spent more than 20 years working with people navigating physical, emotional, mental, and energetic health. Now, Renée's own perimenopause experience didn't go the way the textbooks said it should, including her own as a doctor of TCM. She kept her ovaries after a hysterectomy, could feel something shifting, and was told again and again that her blood work was normal until her ovaries simply stopped. And she went into primary ovarian insufficiency seemingly overnight. What many women move through gradually over years, Renée lived all at once. And it's that lived experience combined with decades of clinical practice that she now brings to the women she works with. Much of Renée's work today is with women in the perimenopause and menopause transition, and with people who experience the world with a particular depth and sensitivity, whether that shows up as neurodivergence or simply as feeling everything a little bit more than most do. And it's that overlap between the hormonal storm of perimenopause and the ADHD conversation that's exploding right now. And I really wanted to talk with her about that today. So Renée, welcome to the fire.
Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to chatting.
It's great to connect with you, darling. And as always in Wildfire, because it's so important that women listening can connect, and obviously many of them will recognise themselves in your story, I'm sure. You're already a doctor of TCM, already helping other women through perimenopause. So, and when it blinded you, can you tell us a little bit what that process, what that journey was for you?
Yeah, it really did blindside me. Like it really took me out. So I was having a bit of time away from work, obviously because I had some health issues going on, and I had endometriosis, or have endometriosis, and had gone under a deep excision surgery, and was kind of, assured that it would get me out of pain. I've been through that rigmarole before, and it usually does for quite some time after, but this one didn't really give me any relief at all. And it was at the point where the pain for me wasn't just cyclic, it wasn't just period pain or anything like that. It was literally becoming daily debilitating pain. So I went in and had that excision surgery, still had the pain, and I'm like, what is there left to do? I have literally tried everything. And so it was at the point where I was like, either just take my uterus out or I'm going to take it out myself, because I just I couldn't stand the pain anymore. So I opted for the hysterectomy, and so that happened 6 months after that deep excision, and I was really deeply hoping that it would get me out of pain, and it kind of hasn't. It has in a way, but hasn't fully. So I knew what to expect going in, and I knew that I also knew that when they took my uterus that it wasn't necessarily going to cure endometriosis, but I was also told that I had adenomyosis as well. So I knew that it would literally take at least that part of the equation off the table. And I was like, even if it gives me a little bit of reprieve, that's something and some quality of life to get back. So
yep.
did that, and once they took it out and then did the biopsy and everything, it literally come back that I didn't have adenomyosis.
Oh, no.
So I was absolutely gutted. Like I was like, I've just given this up, for that and hoping to get pain relief, and didn't even have it in the first place,
Wow.
and still had pain. So I knew, so I knew by taking the uterus that technically I would still be someone that had, stage 4 deep infiltrating endo, which it's been a debilitating thing all of my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I was still in pain, but I thought, okay, they took my uterus, my fallopian tubes, and my cervix as well, just for other risks that were a potential for me with sort of family history and stuff like that. And also just, takes away like risk, even if the risk wasn't there, like through the family. So, but I opted to keep the ovaries to make sure that I was still cycling hormonally at least. So yes, I wouldn't bleed anymore, but by keeping the ovaries, I'm still, having the estrogen move through my body and all of those things that we would normally have, just without the bleed. So that was the plan. And there wasn't really much talk about it, actually, about, I know this now in hindsight, that even with women that do have the hysterectomy and keep their ovaries, we have a higher risk of going into menopause earlier, which I actually didn't know that myself. So that was one thing. And, this didn't happen straight away for me, which I found really bizarre as well. So after the hysterectomy, like I had to go through all sorts of grief and whatever, like all those processes. And I could feel, like I felt so different. I can't even explain how I felt, but I just felt so different. But I could still feel that I had a cycle. And how I knew was because my moods would fluctuate, just how we would. For most women, we might get a bit, like our moods and emotions can change throughout the cycle, through the follicular phase and ovulation. And then when we hit luteal phase, that's normally when we get a little bit wobbly and get some PMS stuff. So I was still having that. So I was like, okay, everything's still working fine. And then like my mental health just plummeted. Like I can't even, it's literally like a switch just went off, and I just felt like a completely different person overnight. And I even kept gaslighting myself, saying, oh, it's probably because you've had this and now you've got the extra grief because of it. Like I kept making all these excuses as to why I was feeling the way I was feeling. But it literally got to the point where I'm like, this is not right. Like, and this is actually getting scary now. So I did go to my GP and I said to her, look, I think my hormones have shut down. She's like, well, Renee, you've still got your ovaries, and just because and I'm like, I know how it works, but I'm telling you how I feel. I literally feel like they've turned off. And I said, can I have my hormones tested? She said, Renee, we literally looked at this a month ago, because it was wobbly then too. And at that time, my hormones looked okay on bloods. But what we need to remember as well is that at any point in time when any woman gets their hormones looked at, it's literally a snapshot in that moment. An hour later, 2 hours later, the next day, that hormone profile could look extremely different. And this is one of the tricky things with perimenopause is, people say that it's just a decline in hormones. It's technically not. It's actually fluctuation in hormones. It's rapid fluctuation. And then it's only towards like the later stage of perimenopause, when we're about to enter menopause, is when the decline starts to steadily happen. So I just wanted to say that because, I even knew that too. I was like, okay, well, that's just a snapshot of my bloods at that point in time. It looked okay. You could tell that I was like starting to get into the peri phase, just with certain levels. And I was like, oh, but it wasn't like a sudden, yes, you're in menopause. And then, so the 4 weeks later I'd said it and she said, okay, let's go in and do, well, actually, no, she was like, we've just done it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you either do it now. I'm like, something is seriously wrong. Anyway, lo and behold, by that time, my hormones were literally undetectable on blood. So
Well, were you doing live blood tests? Because a lot of people may not understand. There's a big difference between the standard medical blood tests and, of course, live analysis as well.
this was standard blood test, but even so, there was, like a huge difference on that. For like even a postmenopausal woman of say 60 or 70, even if they had their bloods tested the same way that I had it tested, their bloods would have still shown at least some level of hormone, like, you know, estrogen reading it somewhere, but obviously very low. And what they would also see would be elevated FSH and LH, which is follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So that's a typical picture of what it would look like. This didn't have that, but just literally was like, it literally said on there, estrogen is undetectable. So straight away she was like, oh, and I was like, oh, great, I've gone into ovarian failure. I mean, they call it ovarian insufficiency now. And, you know, it made sense. So yeah, that to me was just like it blew my mind, because I was like, I knew that that was what was happening. I'm like, it must be, surely there's something. But even to the fact that I was feeling that for at least a month, and even my bloods didn't detect that. Like, it took that long for the actual physical manifestation to go, yeah, this is definitely what's happened. Which, yeah, it was like, wow, look at that.
And that's probably really common with a lot of women, Renee, as well, of like, because I like to believe that we all have that intuitive gift and potential. So a lot of women, I'm sure, will be feeling something different in their body, whether it's subtle, if they've got the ability to feel subtle energies, or they feel something when it gets, you know, to a precipice, like an intense point. And then a lot of them are told to either ignore those feelings or just go home, take a Panadol. It's like, that's a very common story that I hear a lot. I'm sure you've heard that as well. And then the whole thing around, as you said, the bloods, we're getting sort of like funneled into belief systems when we're not really getting the full story.
Exactly. I have that with women a lot. Like, so many women that have come to see me say, oh no, I'm not in perimenopause because I just had my bloods and my doctor told me I'm not, that I'm fine. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way either. You know, it's a lot of it is on the symptoms, but also a lot of it is on, you know, the phase of your life that you're in. So in TCM, we kind of, you know, like through Western, they kind of look at it a bit differently. They mark it by, yes, when your bloods look like this, and then when your period has stopped for 12 months, then you're in menopause. You know, they have this very kind of definitive thing. TCM kind of does acknowledge those things, but at the same time, we look at it as in like they go in like 7-year cycles. So technically, and it doesn't mean like once you hit 35 that it's starting, but that's kind of the usual. Around 35, things start to change. And it's, when I say things start to change, it's the, you know, that person's like the abundance of what they have on ship. So like their yin, their yang, their qi, their jing, their blood, all of these things can start to move and shift. And even the way that the channels will not necessarily work, but the way that they are nourished, and then the way that they move, that already starts to change. So it goes from like 35, then 42 is another big one, then 49 is the huge one. So, you know, when women keep being turned away by saying, oh no, I'm not in perimenopause, but then they're going, but I don't understand because I feel I'm so full of rage, or I have this going on, or I go there and they just want to give me an antidepressant. You know, and for some people, look, that might be what they need and what might help them. Yes. But a lot of the time, even those women that have been put on that, like, will come to me and still sort of say, I'm still struggling with all these things and I can't sleep and I've got this and I've got that. And it's like, yeah, because underneath there is this transition and transformation happening. We might not be able to evidently see it on blood work or anything at that point in time, but it doesn't mean that underneath those foundations and, you know, those subtle realms, that they're starting to shift and take a bit of a different direction.
Yep, totally. As both you and I know you work this way as well, everything starts in that energetic layer of your being.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time of life, usually around 35 or 40. If you do have kids, your kids are kind of like a little bit more self-sufficient. You know, they can feed themselves and go to the bathroom and things like that. They don't technically sort of need you as much as they have so hands-on before. And so that's the beginning of moving into that rite of passage of like, well, I've been in service to my family, or, you know, to my adopted children, or whatever the situation is for women with children. Mm-hmm. And now it's time to take energy back for me.
Yep. I love that you've brought this up, actually, because this is one of the things that literally blew my mind. So as much as I had all of the, you know, my training with TCM way before I'd gone into, you know, this phase of my life, even some of the TCM sort of philosophies I'd even, put to the side or not really thought too much of. Because even in my training, there's certain amounts that we delve into deeply, and then there's other parts that I would call sort of more the energetic or esoteric realms that, yes, they do get mentioned when we're learning this stuff, but they don't place as much emphasis on that particular thing. When we're taught at uni or college or wherever people are being trained, of course, it's going to be on, the patterns, the symptoms, and how we can help that client or that patient, right? But one of the major things that happened to me after the hysterectomy, so I am super sensitive and I can feel like energetic changes dramatically, but I didn't realize that this is what this was at this point in time. Every single night that I would lay down and go to sleep, I kept feeling this energy in my lower abdomen, literally doing these flips and somersaults. Like it was like disturbing in a way, startling, but also like I was super curious. I was just, what is this thing? I'm like, is it that the organs aren't there now and they're all moving around? Like it was giving me these sensory things, but it kept happening for a while. And I was trying to like look into it through the TCM perspective. I'm like, something's happening, but I'm not sure what it is. Anyway, long story short, I come across, there's a particular, it's not necessarily a meridian. So people that might know a little bit about TCM and stuff, they know that we work with meridians. This part's more of like an energetic channel. It's called the Baomai. And basically what it is the heart and the womb connection. And so many women work on this all the time and probably don't even realize, like it's in a lot of women's circles, it's in a lot of energy training. The first thing is place your hand, one hand over your heart, one hand over your womb space. Basically we're connecting in with the Baomai. So you were just mentioning about that time in your life where a lot of the energy has been going outward. It's been an act of service, an act of nurturing. It's the way that it's designed that the flow of the Baomai in our younger years before we enter peri is moving from the heart space down to the womb space. So it has the direction of moving downwards. So it's like the heart to the womb space to, make way for that new life to come in. And then when you've given birth, then the energy is outwardly pouring all the time. What's really fascinating is it's even a known documented thing that the Baomai literally switches direction as we go through perimenopause and menopause. So the energy actually, because it's no longer needed to create life in that way, the energy starts to pull inward and then starts to actually move up towards the heart space. And the reason it does that, it's kind of drawing the energy in, because by this stage, we all know that we're feeling a little bit depleted, right? So it's one way to bring the energy back into ourselves. And the whole reason it moves up towards the heart space, like this is when we start to enter, well, they call it the, what do they call it in TCM? I can't remember, but basically I always call it like the monarch, like the heart, where
the emperor. The emperor.
Yeah, emperor, that's right. And I've always gone, why would we call it the emperor when like we're women and whatever? So anyway, I just call it the monarch. So we enter that part where we're literally, we hear some women say entering their queendom or whatever, however people like to term it. I think it's just fascinating that that's literally what is happening, so that we are actually sitting in that place where we're really in our throne. This is our time of, where we've collected all the gold. We're coming into our wisdom years. And then it's that connection between the heart and, say the higher self or the heart with spirit, where that connection is becoming much stronger. So it's, turning the energy back towards self, because we've been giving to everyone, whether women have had children or not. There's, usually some form of creative expression or acts of service to the community. So it's just this outpouring of what we have to give. And then as that turns around, it does start to move up towards the heart. But what I think was happening for me is, because it happens so rapidly, I think my body almost went into shock. And it was like, what? Like, do I go this way? Do I go this way? I literally could feel this energy flicking from one thing to another and doing like this weird somersault. And when I read about the Baomai again, I was like, I just had that knowing, like, oh my gosh, that's what I was actually feeling. I could literally feel that changing direction.
Yep. I have heard of other stories of that. And when you're saying that, Renee, like the way that I work with that energy is that there's a heart in the womb as well. So it's the relationship between those two dynamics, and that obviously, yes, you're not losing the blood. The body is still wanting to be in service, but now it's like, okay, service to self, which we've been taught as women is very selfish, of course,
Yes.
and certainly our mothers and our grandmothers' generation even more so. But selfishness, coming from obviously not caring about other people, but just being loving enough to yourself, is actually the highest form of self-love, where you are no longer going to sacrifice yourself in the different ways that women do.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
that whole excuse me, the whole blood thing. So I just had a cough then. I'll just leave that in, just having a little cough moment. Um, and isn't it funny? Because, speaking the truth. So when
Yeah.
we're coming from the womb, and usually when I start talking about this stuff, I do start to get a little bit sort of emotional, throaty, and you probably do the same thing. So it's like there's been some, even as part of the conversation that from the very, like when we've just started talking, there's a lot of information, which is a different podcast altogether, around all the galactic wounding in women's wombs as a species, as humanity, and how many times we've been hybridized, and that trauma that we all carry in the cells of our wombs that doesn't, a little bit of it gets shed each month, obviously. But if people aren't doing their personal work and developing themselves energetically and spiritually, then they do come up to that precipice, as you were saying, 35, 40, when things are shifting, and suddenly all that stuff comes up, and they may not be conscious of that level of trauma, but they will certainly, because most people do, have some sort of traumatic experiences in their life that they may not have processed fully. And you'd see that in your work, I'm sure, with that's reflected, of course, in all the meridian, the way that they function, the relationships between the different meridians, because as you know, that's how I work as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, there's so many layers to this. This is what I love, because it's like the rite of passage that we label perimenopause and menopause. Like, I reckon it's only just one rite of passage. I think it was divided, maybe intentionally, who knows, into peri and menopause, just to extend it and get more bang for their buck as far as pharmaceuticals go and treatments go, because it's really just the beginning of the rite of passage. You're in the cauldron, in the smack of it, and then you come out the other end.
Yep.
There's always
Absolutely.
that trine energy around rites of passage for women. We can't speak to men's business, of course, but
Yeah.
yeah, fascinating stuff. And I love the fact that your honesty, obviously, and and admitting, as many as a lot of other practitioners can't either, to just have that humility, which I really respect in you, of despite all your training and despite, over 20 years of clinical experience, that you still had to go through this process. You felt to a high degree unprepared from feeling these things inside your body.
Absolutely. And if anything, I felt like I hit this thing of like I wasn't even drawing on anything anymore. I just felt so out of it. I felt like didn't know who I was anymore. Like it was a major thing. It wasn't like I even went straight to going, like I've shared with you how I was like, oh, something must be happening here. I'm going to go look this up. That actually took me a long time to do. Like I was just in it for ages and it was throwing me around. And it was only until I started to get a little bit of my resources back that I was like, hold on a minute, this is not me. Like something is really happening. And it was by revisiting all of that and rereading things and connecting back into, a lot of my foundations of teaching and stuff that I was able to kind of dig myself out and start to find my way through again. But I also love that you even brought that up about the energetic stuff and the womb stuff there, because it is a massive thing as well. And also another thing that I've been drawing on and touching on with my work. And I've been lately trying to write an ebook that covers like all these areas, like the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and energetic shifts that are actually part of this transition. And, I love it because TCM does have a good kind of explanation for that too. Like I just spoke about the Bao Mai, but we have what we know as the Chong Mai, which is like the original blueprint of everything. And it's where like the basis of all of that, well, I guess the foundations of how we then animate and manifest from. But basically the Chong and the Chong Mai is the original one before it even went into the split of like yin and yang, and things the meridians start to develop, then the organs, then the body, da 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 da. So it has this big unfolding, but it's from the Chong Mai that sits underneath, and it does kind of come up and connect into the uterus as well, and then moves through the body and then starts to animate these meridians. But what's fascinating is that, even the stuff that I've had to work through myself, some of it is from this lifetime, yes. Some of it is not. Like some of it is ancestral, some of it is energetic, some of it is those sort of external things that have made their way in there. But the beauty of the Chongmai is that in this phase of perimenopause and menopause as well, that because all of the other resources are kind of, well, they are declining in a way, like they are moving down and in towards the self again. But underneath, like that big current of the Chongmai, where all we call it like the meridians, but also the 12 rivers, like where they were originated from, a lot of the stuff that was embedded and underneath, right deep down into the very fabric of who we are, can hold a lot of those ancestral wounds in there. And so this phase of our life is actually the time to really dig deep and get deep into that stuff and basically excavate and unearth a lot of that stuff that was either passed down that was not ours, or, yep, as you've said, like other energetic things that need to get out of our womb space. But it's brilliant because with a lot of the, if we look at it through the lens of, yes, we might be feeling shit and we might have all this rage come up and all these old stories, and it's very common for women to have a lot of their family stuff come up again. It's like having the understanding of this is actually working for me, I think is a really helpful way. Like it's helping me get through, I know that.
Mm.
And so when all that stuff's coming up, it gives the opportunity for us to work with it and start to actually move it out and through the body. And hopefully as the generations move forward, so because that's what's given, so from the mother and father, their jing from their Chongmai is passed to us as well, and then us to somebody else. So we've probably heard in the spiritual spaces about all of the stuff, that the work that we do for ourselves and on ourselves, we're having an effect forward 7 generations and back 7 generations as well. So any of the work that we do on ourselves now really does have that huge ripple effect.
Totally. Is again so many layers to this, and I always love, I mean, in the shamanic side of things, because as you know, I've done TCM as well in my yoga studies, and then the shamanism came in later. And as far as things in the blood and the Chongmai and all that, yes, but the shamanic languaging, I suppose, for those things that you're finding, like the really deep roots. Like I always visualize a deep pond with a lotus flower
Yep.
at the bottom, all that murky, slimy, silty stuff, which is like really fertile and looks like crap. But then, of course, you get this beautiful lotus that comes up that feeds on that. And it's one of my first tattoos that I had because I love that analogy. But in
Yep.
shamanism, in the energy, it would be, inclusions and imprints and implants and those sorts of things. So it's the same thing, different language. Just
Absolutely.
as, you've got the Indian Hindu side of things, the yoga side of things, or the Ayurvedic. And I've studied that too. And it's the same thing, different languaging, really. So if
Yep.
anyone's listening to this podcast, for example, and you're more on the yogic side or vice versa, or maybe somewhere in the middle, then just encourage you not to get too stuck on labels and to stay open, because this is really just different perspectives. All cultures around the world share so many values and principles and practices energetically, spiritually, that we're only just learning about how common, they actually are, how much they have in common with that. And another thing I want to say before we move into the ADHD stuff, Renee, is that I've always felt too, like, again, it's part of that languaging from traditional medicine, or modern Western medicine, I should say, rather, that we are declining, that we get to a certain age, we're aging, that we're losing, like all those words go with that. And it's like, it's the same as like, and you get this, that you can't lose energy. It just goes into different pockets around your body. Like it'll just be deficient in Kyo or Jitsu and too expansive and restless. So it's not like you can just plug yourself into a socket and drain stuff out and then refill, or plug yourself into a socket and recharge yourself. I mean, that would be wonderful if we could do that. But our energy is in this constant state of flux, moving into different pockets and different layers of our being. And I've always seen the perimenopause experience, now that I'm on the other side of it, as the same, that you don't lose hormones. And you sort of alluded to it before. Like I see them as shape shifting. They're just moving and transforming and transmuting and coming to a new relationship within themselves and then within each other as a system that they're being created, from your own hormonal, mainframe.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go with you on what you just shared about like looking through the different lenses, the yogic stuff, the shamanistic stuff, the TCM, I think this is the beauty of it, is that all of these parts are showing that this phase of our life is absolutely a rite of passage. It is an opportunity for major transformation, and it's to get us out of that framework of, oh yes, from the Western med, that yes, all this is just declining and this is just the way of life and aging and you're moving towards death kind of thing. So I think that's the most important thing, is to frame it as though this is a transition. And the more, I think, awareness we have of that, because it can feel very disorientating. So for me, I think the more info we have around that, the more understanding of like, oh, wow, this is actually a full-on metamorphosis, that it makes it so much easier to connect with, and it actually helps deepen the relationship with yourself. Like, I know that's what's happening for me, is that it's helping me to reconnect with myself from that point of view of going, oh, I'm not just in ovarian failure and have endometriosis and have this and have this and have this. It's like, oh, wow, yes, my body's been through all these things, or now all my organs have been taken, and I'm now moving towards a very, very different version of myself. And that's the whole point of it. And exactly, so the hormones are fluctuating, they are doing all these things, but they're doing it for a purpose. Like, one of the most fascinating things I think is, one of the symptoms that most women have is like this major brain fog. And yes, there's a reason for that too. Like, our brain is flooded with estrogen receptors, and yes, if they're fluctuating, the brain's going to be affected. I agree with that. But also, I think the fog actually has its part there. Like, I've kind of separated it between just normal kind of brain fog to like this almost soul fog. And it's like, I think that is actually, like, it doesn't mean it's something that's wrong. I think it's actually part of the process, because what it does is help us enter into a more almost amnesic or like a liminal space where that deconstruction of the old can actually happen and make way for the new, because we call it the second spring in TCM. So we go through all these seasons and cycles of our life, and then we enter what we'd go, perimenopause is autumn, and then menopause being winter. But that's not the end. Like, we get to actually start again. We get to start again from spring in this new version of ourselves. So I find that fascinating, because we can also liken it to, we know that the brain has the ability of neuroplasticity. And so in that phase of all that fog, our brain is literally changing, but we actually get to choose the way it changes as well. Like, I find that really fascinating.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a huge topic, and it is totally like right up my alley as well. And I've had a couple of conversations and podcasts around it. There's lots of different ways that you could, different branches you could take that conversation in. But
Yeah.
where I really wanted to get you on today, Renee, is because there's the conversation that we're seeing happening right now. It's all over social media. It's in clinics. It's in women's chat groups. It's all about ADHD and perimenopause, and women suddenly being diagnosed, in their 40s and 50s, and often recognizing some of those symptoms on the lists for the first time. So let's talk about, like, where do you sit both clinically and personally about what's really going on here with ADHD and perimenopause?
So I think there's a few things happening there in terms of, I think that it's a huge topic at the moment. One, because we have social media and word gets around a lot more now. Women are more inclined to talk about their experiences now and their personal experiences, whereas back in the day, that didn't kind of used to happen. So I think that's a huge thing. And then when people are hearing and seeing other women's experiences, it's making them go, oh my gosh, that looks like me too. And it kind of invites them into, I guess, looking into that and maybe seeking help if they need help. Some women are completely fine with it. But for me, I can kind of look at it and go, wow, that was my complete unraveling and unmasking, was when I did go into that sudden menopause. So my symptoms just went through the roof. Like, my sensitivities went through the roof. I was already light sensitive, but this was to a ridiculous degree. Sound, couldn't go to the shops, just the unbearable sensitivities really hit me pretty thick and fast. So
Yep.
I did sort of seek some help with that, and also started to, it's one of my things that I guess being neurodivergent, when something pops up, I will get like a special interest and then just dive really deep in it and try and look at things from heaps of different lenses. So I'll just dive in and look at it that way and this way and that way, and then see kind of what resonates for me and then sort of go from there. But that's kind of how, my introduction for that for myself came about.
Yep. And I think it's important to note too, this is my personal perspective, but other people I'm sure will share it. And I think you probably do to a degree as well, is like that we've got to also be really mindful of labels.
Mm-hmm.
I had a son who was diagnosed with all that stuff when he was younger, and I went through that journey as a single mum for like 10 years of just being psychologically manipulated by the system and family and all sorts of crazy stuff. And it wasn't until like I really saw him come into his own at around about 14 or 15 that it all sort of landed, and I was like, there was actually nothing wrong with him. It was just all this projection and labeling and expectation that I had naively at that time many years ago wasn't aware of. So I think a lot of women also just get sort of swept up into conversations or into even protocols that they don't really fully understand. And again, that could just be really from the energetic point, that energy is just stagnant. It's either flaccid or it's chronically imbalanced in some way. And now it's going to, as you mentioned, yin and yang before, at some point, just because it's in your body doesn't mean that that doesn't apply to you. It's going to have to just ping, a switch, like you talked about the blood going up the other direction.
Yeah.
So that's going to affect your brain. And yes, the brain fog thing is interesting, because maybe we don't need to remember everything. We just need to remember the important things. So you're kind of letting go of too much stuff in the head. It's really interesting to look at from that, because I know we need frameworks to diagnose, and that some people, in my experience anyway, and from what I've witnessed in the years that I've been doing this work, that there's, as I said before, there's always a spiritual or energetic component. That for me is the initiator of anything that then works its way through the other layers of the person, through the mind and the heart space into the physical. So once something's in the physical body, it's chronic already.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agree. And with the whole labels thing, I do agree with that too. Like even when I first found out, like I found myself going into that, or the label thing, and then attaching it with, oh my God, there's something wrong with me, and that's all of those things followed for a little bit. The good thing about it for me is that like I witnessed that, and because I've had honestly, the amount of medical labels that I've had, I have to wear them for a bit and then take them off. Like I don't wear them and like over identify. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So for me, that was literally just a framework, and what it did for me was allow me to explore and investigate different ways of being, because that's what neurodivergence is, right? We're just not the neurotypical. It's just ways of being a little bit different, right? And so I already knew that about myself anyway. And for me, what it's done is actually help me to understand myself more, and then find ways to support myself or accommodate myself or anything like that, if that makes sense. So it's more of, looking at things as like a little bit of a portal or an invitation of getting to understand myself a little bit more, and then that relationship I have with self.
And you could possibly even see that as like, I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not saying this is a reality, but maybe it might help someone listening to this to think, okay, well, maybe if I am in perimenopause and I've been diagnosed with this ADHD neurodivergency sort of thing, then maybe that is just because I need a little bit more structure, because I just need that little bit of extra support, because the things that I have been moving through all my life, which are making this transition so uncomfortable and painful and all those things for me, is just, that next level of attention that I need to devote to myself. Who knows?
Absolutely. Well, the connection there, this was helpful for me. So like, one of the known things of being neurodivergent is the ability for pattern recognition, right? And so my brain works in that way where I go, oh, I can see that. How does that link with this then? Like, and then I kind of follow those breadcrumbs and try and understand it. But I think why it's exploding so much in this time with, the two of them going hand in hand is because there's an absolute relationship there with it. We have to look at the relationship between hormones themselves being chemical messages and with our neurotransmitters. And so for people that have, if they label themselves as neurodivergent or have ADHD or autism or whatever that divergence is that what's happening there is that person's brain, again, not going to say deficiency, like people say it's a dopamine deficiency, could be looked at as that way. It's the way that it's dopamine regulation. So it's the way that we can kind of hold those neurotransmitters. And so what's happening, as we know that we've already established that, yes, our hormones fluctuate and change throughout this period. We know that for a fact. It's part of the metamorphosis. As those levels change, all of the ripple effect through all the layers of us change. But what it is, and I think the reason why it's exploding for women is because we didn't realize that our hormones are actually part of our buffering system of the nervous system and the neurotransmitters. So when the hormones are moving and affecting, it literally has that ripple effect on the way that our neurotransmitters are working. And so, for example, estrogen has a massive relationship with yin, being TCM, right? But estrogen has a massive influence on the way, on our dopamine and serotonin. So if estrogen's moving up and down, guess what? So is your dopamine and your serotonin. And then the same as progesterone, women that can't sleep, if they're lower in progesterone. The relationship between progesterone and our pregnenolone and then our GABA, which is the thing that makes our brain relax and go to sleep, that's fluxing too. So it's not necessarily that these things are wrong, it's just that they're moving and fluxing, and that people that are neurodivergent, we feel these deeply. Like we feel those tiny subtleties probably a bit more than a neurotypical would, because one, it's probably not fluctuating as much, and then two, our sensitivity to be able to pick up on those nuances is also a little bit more magnified, Yeah,
it's almost like no wonder so many women feel like they're on a speeding train they can't get off. All these things this is happening simultaneously, and that takes me to you're almost about to answer my next question for you. So what's happening in a woman's system when we go through TCM perspective, when she's experiencing what gets labeled as ADHD symptoms during menopause? Like, what's the energetic and the physical diagnostic checklist, I suppose, if there's one?
Yeah, this is good too, because it kind of like gives a segue and show the relationship, the similarities and the differences between the Western med. So I've just like explained what's happening like neurochemically, right? But from that TCM perspective, basically everything that a TCM practitioner will look at with the person in front of them is the patterns that are happening in their body, what the organs are doing, what the blood, yin and yang, are doing. And so if I was to get in this room right now, and I'm the practitioner, I had 10 women in front of me that all said that they were neurodivergent and they're going through perimenopause. That doesn't mean that I would look at every single one of those and say that their pattern or presenting pattern would be the same. Because one, it is on that person's constitution, but also where they are with it. Some people have excess fire or deficient chi or a lot of dampness in the body. So to answer and give like an actual, this is what's happening, it's liver chi stagnation with, heat rising, which could be a pattern, but the person next to them could have a very different pattern. So basically, I think the beauty of TCM here is that we're not looking at the woman as though she's broken, she's deficient, all these things are just happening. It's basically how is her body presenting? Where are the areas in her body that may be in disharmony? Like what organs are not talking to each other properly, or what organs seem to not have enough nourishment or enough blood or enough jing, And then how could I support that woman in terms of herbal medicine or acupuncture or lifestyle advice, or even just giving her, some things to kind of do at home. So basically, the difference there is just about the constitution, the pattern underneath, and how to support, depending on whatever those manifestations or symptoms are for that woman, then you'd go in and remedy it that way. So basically what we're always trying to do in TCM is bring balance and harmony back between, because each of the organs is associated with an element per se. So we're always trying to balance in with nature. We're always trying to get those organs chatting to each other, those elements in a harmonious relationship, rather than, because we talk about the generating cycle, and then there's like an over controlling cycle in TCM. So if something's way out, then we tend to it that way, and then if something's deficient, we tend to it that way. So it's just, and then by doing so, we're kind of coming underneath and giving a bit of a support for the woman to move through that transition with a little bit more ease and grace, so to speak.
It's beautiful, and it's really just introducing women who may not know about this, that their body is intelligent. It's an intelligent system of, so many different layers and organs and energetics and concepts and things like that.
Mhm.
And you're really sort of just introducing them to that idea. And you talked about patterns beneath the symptoms, and helping them become aware that there's more behind just what their symptom is. As I say also, that the symptom is a messenger.
Absolutely.
There's reasons for that messenger showing up, because you've treated your body in a certain way. If you've always been eating this food, for example, or you had never really felt fulfilled. I mean, there's so many different branches off that. And of course the neurodivergence, the sensitivity adds another layer to that as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Let's get practical, okay? And share for women what really helps. So for the woman who's listening, who's in the thick of this right now, like fog, fatigue, scattered focus, maybe a new ADHD of some sort diagnosis on top of everything else that perimenopause is throwing at her, where would you suggest that she actually starts?
Well, it all has to start with, obviously herself. But I think the important thing to know here is that there is a lot of help out there. It's not just like, there's so much on offer. We could work with these women in a way if they choose to do BHRT, not BHRT, if they want to be supplementing, if they want to work with their diet, if they want to work with herbs. There's many options there. So it has to obviously resonate with the person. But I would say, especially if they're very sensitive, especially to medications, all that sort of thing, is that there is help available. And of course, I'm going to say go and see a TCM practitioner, because I think it's a wonderful modality. But the reason for that, and the reason why I think it's such a really good modality, is because we're not looking at the person or their symptoms and that as though it's like a definitive diagnosis that they have and that they can't get better. It's always about looking at what's the relationship with them, with themselves, and with themselves with nature. And that's been the biggest draw card for me to even want to learn that medicine anyway. But also I think it frees up a lot of that mental thing of there's something wrong with me. It's just literally going, all right, what pattern or dance do we have going on today, and how can I work with that? I think there's just a lot more ease and grace in that, and rather than kind of pushing us into these boxes or things that we feel like there's something wrong. Because the moment we have that and we go, there's something wrong with me, that relationship with self is already a little bit distorted and already has a little bit of space in it. Whereas if we approach it from, yeah, wow, my liver is really stagnant and really unhappy at the moment because I've got so much anger and irritability. All right, cool, liver. How can I, tune into the liver? How can I work with you? What do you need? And, from a TCM perspective, it's, associated with the element wood. How can I work with that? What herbs does the liver like? What foods does the liver like? And start to actually move towards self and towards the body, rather than wanting to always cast away our feelings or symptoms or, things that make us feel uncomfortable, which is like, I get it. I do it too. But there is always a way to actually move towards the self with self-compassion, rather than, casting it out or casting it away.
Also not reaching, this is what I love about, it's funny because I call the alternative therapies, like what we're doing in acupuncture and yoga and kinesiology and all those things that are labeled as such, they're actually the original therapies. For me at least, the allopathic method is the alternative to the natural. And so everything that I've learned and everything that I teach, similar to yourself, is all about empowering the woman to recognize that first of all, there's not a one size fits all protocol. That doesn't work for everybody, as you well know. And sometimes it might, and you have to do little tweaks. But I mean, if you're only just tweaking, for example, a medication and the dosage of that, then that's still a one size fits all protocol. You're not actually tailoring it, as you just mentioned, to working out when this woman's season is and what the emotions are that are held, and then how that's creating that imbalance between the parent and the grandparents in the 5 element theory system and all those things. And it's for me, I'm just seeing everything. I mean, my work has always been about this because that's how I was introduced to it, like 40 years ago, was
Mm-hmm.
all about empowering myself to become, the self-healer. And I'm loving watching this slowly sort of infuse itself through, both industries. I mean, allopathic is certainly going through its own transition there as well and becoming a lot more aware, shall we say. And even within the alternative realms, there's more sort of propensity to teaching people how to look after themselves and not be so reliant on practitioners. Not to put people out of business, of course, because you always need somebody, you always need help and support and guidance and, an expert, like a second opinion sort of thing. But for a woman who's starting to learn to read her own body signals, that can be like, that's a huge journey. I remember that from
Huge.
myself, and you would too. And you've been going through that and this is what I love too about being practitioners and sharing honestly like this, because we're still human and we still go through all these things, and it doesn't make us infallible just because we might have a plaque on our wall or we do a podcast or something. We still bleed and we still cry and we still have all the aches and pains and we still get our heart broken, and we're
Yep,
still dealing with all the pollution and corruption in the world,
that's
still
right.
drinking in all the crap and all those things, which we won't talk about in this podcast, but people will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so,
But even that, Denby, I mean, like, it's exactly right. Even that we could look at as that's just a label. Like, I'm a TCM practitioner. It's just a label. Like, all of these things, at the end of the day,
yeah,
we're all the same underneath. And, interesting you say that about, you know, people doing it for themselves and becoming their own self healer. I'm completely on board with that too. And in fact, my whole business is changing. Like, I'm changing the model of that to support that. So the biggest thing I want to do now with women in particular is having that impact on sharing this knowledge and wisdom and coming up with ways that they can actually do this themselves out there. But, they have to start somewhere with getting at some sort of foundation of knowledge, because if they don't know it's there, it's really hard for them to connect to and to work with. They end up getting just, dragged through the transition by their hair, so to speak. So, it's about getting that awareness out there and giving these women something to kind of, for their brain to start to munch on and ponder, and to get their, even the energetics of them starting to get them curious, because that curiosity starts to open a lot and starts to open a lot of relationship with themselves as well, which I find amazing.
yeah, and that's what we're all here for, is to learn to love ourselves, I think. Um, I always close every wise words conversation with this question for my beautiful guests. And for you, it's what is the one thing you wish every woman navigating this overlap of ADHD and perimenopause knew?
Okay, I'm going to bring it to like the tagline of my business. So it's remember yourself through your body's innate wisdom. That's basically what it is. It's having this thing, that this knowing and this trust that the body does have its own innate intelligence. And if we start to be able to tune into that and start to be able to communicate with that, it just makes the whole process a lot easier. And it helps with our process of intuition on then what we may need to do next. So yes, the women might need some help somewhere along the line. But even to develop that connection with self to the point of going, what do you feel you need? And to be able to ask that question and then getting a clear sort of answer on the direction that the woman wants to go, and having the trust in doing so, I think that's a great start.
Perfect start.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about labels a bit today, so let's just as a tag on to that, if you could remove one label from how we talk about women's health, not necessarily just ADHD, perimenopause, but just women's health in general in your clinical experience, what would it be and what would you replace it with?
Yeah, it would probably, I mean, it sounds pretty cliche, but it is what it is. Like, it's about that thing of we're not broken, or not like over identifying with the things that make us feel not good enough or less than, or that there's something wrong or different with me, right? I think it's, yeah, taking that off and just being like, the replacement is like, you are perfect as you are. Your body is doing what it's doing for different reasons. Like, if we all had the same template and we all had the same thing, we wouldn't have diversity in our culture and society. Like, we need people that are sensitive and different to feel different things, to be able to give, different thoughts or different ways of being. Because if we were, and it's not to downplay like neurotypical people either, but I think if we have a look at it, like, the neurotypical person, they might be totally cool to get up and go to a job 9 to 5 and do the XYZ thing and da-da-da. Some of the neurodivergent people, that's just not for them. But that's what creates this diversity, you know?
I love that. And you know what stays with me mostly from this conversation, Renee, is the reminder that our bodies, they've never stopped talking to us. We've been taught not to trust the language. And yeah, a label can be useful. It can open a door. It can give us a vocabulary, a community, a way to ask for help, as you say, but I don't think it was ever meant to be the whole story. So perhaps what's really happening for so many women right now isn't a sudden epidemic of broken brains, quote unquote. Perhaps it's the volume finally turning up loud enough through the fire of this transition that we can no longer ignore the way that we were always wired to be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I really do think that that is actually what's happening. I think even collectively, as we are, you know, shifting or transcending, like whatever the words are you want to use, or evolving is probably a good one, or waking up, remembering, there are really good words I'd put in there too, that is happening. And I think it is getting to the point where it's getting, you know, if it was speaking softly before and we ignore it, it's getting louder and louder and louder to the point where we can't ignore it anymore. And I think that's actually the beauty of it.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your story with us today. I'll include contacts for your businesses and your amazing work in the description below. And hopefully we can do this again another time soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Denby.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Wildfire. And if something in this conversation landed for you, sat with you, or lit something up inside or underneath you, I'd love for you to share it with a woman in your life you feel needs to hear it. Because that's how this medicine travels. Woman to woman, story to story, heart to heart. If you're ready to go deeper into your own midlife journey, come find me at dembyshiva.com. The door to Mana Yoga Medicine is always open. And if today's conversation moved you, the most generous thing you can do is leave a review. It only takes a couple of minutes, and it helps Wildfire reach the women who need it most. Until next time, stay in your fire, stay on the rise, and remember, you are not burning out. You are becoming.